This conference will now be recorded.
We will start our presentation. So welcome. I think I recognize all the names here, but if we haven't met before, my name is Jennifer Buhait. I am the Education Coordinator at Old Woman Creek National Estuarine Research Reserve. We do this brown bag series April through October, the first Friday of every month, and we have our whole calendar planned. I'll give you some of the highlights at the end of this presentation. And we have Bre Hohman is the Watershed Coordinator. She will be talking about our water quality monitoring program. But before I introduce Bre, I'm going to introduce Carrie Ritzenthaler, and she is a graduate student at BGSU, and she's doing a very interesting study about people and the environment and how events do or do not impact people's feelings about the environment. So I'm going to let Carrie take it from there. She'll do a better job explaining it than me. Carrie?
Yeah, hi everyone. Like Jennifer said, I am Carrie Ritzenthaler. I'm working towards a PhD at Bowling Green State University, but I grew up in Sandusky, so I'm very familiar with Old Woman's Creek and the area on Lake Erie. So my research is focusing on what people learn and how attitudes and behaviors might change from attending environmental education events like this Brown Bag Lunch series. So at the end of the presentation, I'm going to put a link to a survey in the chat. And if you're interested in helping me out by participating in my research, all you have to do is click on that, and it should take you like 10 to 15 minutes to complete. And at the end, you have the chance to enter your email into a drawing for an Amazon gift card. So a little incentive there maybe. But yeah, I think that is all I need to say about that. If anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to email me or ask in the chat. I'm here, so yeah.
Thanks, Carrie. And I will put the link to the survey in the chat. I will put Carrie's email address in the chat, and then you will probably receive an email after the brown bag if you want to just deal with the survey later than during this brown bag. All right. Thank you so much. And with that, I will introduce Bre Hohman, who is familiar probably to all of you, our longest standing member now at the reserve. So Bre is the Watershed Coordinator. You're muted, Bre.
I was just trying to say I'm the old woman now.
Yeah, you did. You took the crown off of Kim's head after Kim retired. So she's our Watershed Coordinator. She helms the volunteer water monitoring program, which is always a mouthful for me to say. And each year we do, she does, or issues a report card for our watershed and then 2 others in the Sandusky area. So Bre, I'm going to let you take it away and give us those report card grades.
Right. Okay, I'm clicking on share screen and I don't know if it's working.
It is not working. I'm gonna... All right, try it now.
Okay.
There you go.
I think we're good.
Oh, Bre, can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
For those of you using this, if you look at your screen now and you want to make the slides bigger, at the it should be like 2 rows of picture boxes or not pictures where our videos used to be. In the middle, there should be a toggle bar that you can make the picture smaller and the slide a little bigger. Hopefully that helps everyone. All right, thanks, Bre.
Okay, So I'm having a little bit of difficulty trying to minimize the GoToMeeting stuff. All right, I think you guys can see everything. My view is a little bit blocked, but we're gonna go from here. So again, thank you. I'm so appreciative that every year I get to go a little bit more in depth about our stream monitoring program and a little bit about the watershed report cards. There are a lot of familiar faces on the call, so bear with me. We're going to kind of go over some material that I've gone over in the past where I just talk a little bit about what we monitor and how we monitor and how the report cards are developed. And after that, though, we'll kind of really get into the nitty-gritty on the grades and talk a little bit about stewardship and some of the needs that we have, not only for Old Woman Creek, but for pretty much most of the watersheds in the Lake Erie Basin. So with that, we'll get started. I always like to kind of start with us kind of taking a reflection point to kind of think about really what the importance of water is. I think that, you know, not only do we live in a country where water is just, you know, a little bit of a walking to the sink and getting it right out of the tap away. So it's something that we often really take for granted. Most people, you know, don't think about it, how many times we use water throughout the day, whether it's, you know, the shower in the morning, whether it's washing our dishes, whether it's getting a glass of water, whether it's cooking. I mean, lots of times when I talk with people and I talk about how water is important to them, the first thing they'll say is, well, I don't even drink glasses of water. I like, you know, pop or juice or whatever it is. But the reality is that, you know, we are very, very dependent on water. And we're in a position where we take it for granted because not only do we live on Lake Erie, and when you stand on the shores and look out, you know, to the north, you know, that area is so expanse that, you know, we're not necessarily like Arizona or some other type of arid place where water is very, very scarce. One other thing I don't think that we think about a lot is that when the water comes out of our tap all nice and clean, we really don't think about really how it got that way. And the reality is that you cannot go dip a glass of water out in a lake or out in a stream and just drink from it. I mean, certainly you can, but you're probably not going to have a couple of good few days afterwards from that. Lots of times our streams can be very visually cloudy. They can harbor different types of toxins, you know, whether they're toxins from algae. They may also be toxins because of untreated waste that's in the stream. So again, I just always like to kind of take that reflection point that, you know, we are very, very fortunate not only to live on such a great freshwater resource, but we also live in both an era of technology and also a country that has the means to really provide a lot of clean water. And because of that, again, we usually take some things for granted, and we're really not that concerned when Lake Erie turns brown and frothy, or, you know, maybe our streams are you know, having some dead fish in them. We don't think very much about it because, again, it's not really impacting us on a personal level. So kind of thinking again about, you know, Lake Erie, even though it's a huge body of fresh water, really in the grand scheme of the earth, it's very, very scarce. So here's just a quick image of the earth. You know, it's got the nickname, the big blue marble, and there's no doubt of why we've got that. You know, there's water seemingly everywhere, more water than the land. But when you actually take the water and you try to say, okay, well, what's actually usable for us? This is just a little depiction that shows that largest big drop of water, and I guess one of my animations didn't work, but that big large drop of water, if we were condense all of the water on the earth, that's the saltwater component. Now that smaller drop there next to it is all the fresh water in the world, but a lot of that is really locked up in icebergs and groundwater and ice caps and things like that, so it's not really that usable. This tiny little dot right there represents all the surface water that's actually accessible to us. So that's reservoirs, lakes, streams, wetlands, things like that. And out of that tiny little dot that's on there, the Great Lakes represent 20% of that tiny little dot. So it really kind of says, hey, you know what? There's a lot of water on the earth, but really the freshwater resource and the resource that we have on the Great Lakes is very, very scarce. And it really means that we've got our job to do to really protect that and make sure that it's going to be usable. So just a quick look, if you're not familiar with the Lake Erie watershed, this is just a really quick depiction. That little the green shading around Lake Erie is really all the drainage basin. So it's all the land that drains down into the Great Lakes. Even though we've got lots of streams that go into Lake Erie, most of our water, about 80% or so, actually comes from the upper Great Lakes. So Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron are all kind of coming together, coming down the Detroit River and entering Lake Erie. Now you would think, well, hey, if 80% of the water is really coming from the upper Great Lakes, well, then probably all the pollution is coming from there as well. But the reality is even though that the Detroit River is a significant contribution to some of Lake Erie's nutrient sediment issues, the majority of it is actually coming out of not only the Western Basin primarily, but pretty much most of the watersheds as well in Ohio. So why is that a problem? Well, again, you always got to kind of bring it back to how it impacts us directly. With the sediment that comes through our watersheds, we've got some pretty significant challenges with keeping our ports open. And we're going to have to do dredging. That's billions of dollars, of constantly trying to pull some of those sediments back out. Obviously, we've got drinking water issues. It's not too far long ago that we actually had that drinking water crisis in Toledo where everything was shut down. But even after that, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that as these algal blooms are happening out on the lake, there's still thousands and thousands of dollars being spent daily to help pull some of those toxins back out so that our water is coming out as clean as we expect it to be from the tap. When you think about, what do these algal blooms, what do these untreated sewage, sediment, things like that do to our tourism industry? Well, the coast is a major component of the tourism dollars for Ohio. And so every time that our beaches are closed down, that's really going to hurt that industry. And then it's not always about us, right? It's also about the wildlife out there. And what we're finding is that as our lake has become rich with nutrients and sediment, we're also starting to see that there's some pretty significant issues to some of our native fish species as well. So talking a little bit now, we know kind of there's a lot of problems in our lake, and we know that, hey, you know what? It's a pretty big watershed. It's a pretty big, we've got a lot of different types of factors to really look at. So how do we know where to start? How do we know how to resolve this problem? And we can do that through various types of monitoring programs. Obviously, there's monitoring being done by the government. Old Woman Creek has a very robust monitoring program called the system-wide monitoring program. There's universities that help to participate in different types of monitoring. But another aspect of it is citizen monitoring. With citizen science. And that's what I'm going to really be reporting on today with these report cards. It's actually a combination of what our volunteers help us to sample. And then we also, in the Old Woman Creek watershed, combine it with what the Old Woman Creek Reserve Monitoring Program is able to collect. So our program began in 2008, and we started doing our report cards in 2012. Currently, right now, we're monitoring 3 different watersheds, and I'm going to give you guys the scores of all of them, but I'm going to spend most of the time talking about Old Woman Creek. Collectively, we're looking at 25 different sites. Our volunteers go out and sample those sites once a month, and then we also go out and do a macroinvertebrate sampling at several sites in each watershed that we monitor once a year. Currently, we have just a little over 20 volunteers. I kind of have a plus on there because we have volunteers that are trained by us, but sometimes those volunteers will bring additional helpers with them that aren't formally trained, but obviously can help out as well. Just a quick little look of where we monitor. Mills Creek all the way to the west in the purple, and Pipe Creek in the dark green. We monitor 7 sites in Mills Creek, 8 sites in Pipe Creek, and then again, what we're going to talk about today is Old Woman Creek right there in the blue, and that's the site that we have our most monitoring locations in, and we're at 10 sites currently. All of our monitors, I'll back up one. All of our monitors, they actually take their stream samples from bridges, and one of the nice things about sampling from a bridge is it's a spot where all the water is definitely going to go under that bridge, so it's a nice, good constriction point. It's also, bridges are open to the public, right? So we're not really trespassing anybody's land to go and get these samples. And we always try to monitor in pairs as well too, and that's obviously a safety thing. So you can kind of see, you know, we've got the nice bright orange vests on there. We try to pick roads that don't have really high traffic and things like that for our monitoring program. After they collect a sample, they come back and they actually monitor away from the bridge as well as a safety protocol. So what are we looking at? Well, you know, the big three in Lake Erie are always in reference to nitrogen, phosphorus, and turbidity. So we're looking at the nutrients, you know, and these are the types of things that are going to be driving different types of algal blooms, and also the dead zone in Lake Erie. And we're also looking at turbidity. So that's basically how cloudy our water is. And what's important about turbidity is, you know, it impacts a lot of the aquatic life in the system. And then again, turbidity is really linked to the dredging issues that we have to continue to keep funding. So with water quality, when you're looking at things like nutrients and sediment, those can change very, very rapidly. Obviously, when we have a storm, usually we'll see either spikes in turbidity, sometimes even phosphorus and nitrogen as well, depending on what watershed that we're in. So they kind of give you just this snapshot type of look every time we go out and sample. To give us a little bit wider, broad range of what's going on in our watersheds, we also look at benthic macroinvertebrates once a year. Now, if you think about it, the macroinvertebrates are the types of organisms that are living in that particular stream habitat throughout the entire year. So it gives us kind of this long range look to say, hey, is there something chronically going on in the stream that maybe is indicating, or excuse me, that is maybe preventing certain sensitive species from even inhabiting it. So if you imagine you're living in a neighborhood that the crime all of a sudden increases and you just get hit after natural disaster after natural disaster, if you've got the means, you're probably going to move out of that neighborhood. Same thing happens with the macroinvertebrates, is they're either going to relocate to another location, or unfortunately, there may not be the right type of habitat to support that species, and they eventually die off. Another thing that we look at is called vital signs indicators. A vital sign, think about going to the doctor, and the first thing they're going to do is they're going to weigh you, they're going to take your temperature, your blood pressure, and that's going to give you this baseline, you know, are you doing okay? If your blood pressure goes down, or say your heart rate starts to race, you're probably going to pass out. Same thing with a stream. We kind of group some of our parameters like pH, temperature, dissolved oxygen, and ammonia as these very vital types of parameters that if something's really out of line, we're probably going to see an acute and an immediate environmental response to that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about dissolved oxygen a little bit later, but that's probably one clear one that I can suggest. If your oxygen drops out of the system, it can often result in a fish kill. So. And then we also do look at bacteria. This is one that's actually collected by the health department. And bacteria is basically just telling us, is the water safe to swim in? Is it safe to do what we call primary contact, you know, mainly swimming, wading, things like that. So how do we score our report cards? Well, when you're not doing a high frequency of monitoring, what we can do is we can take every observation that we have, and then we can compare it to what we consider a threshold of health. And so that threshold is based on if something either exceeds or is below a particular range of a threshold, we expect that to then result in negative impacts to the aquatic life of that system. I'm not going to go through each individual threshold here on the side, but what I will say is that these thresholds were developed through doing a literature review of the research, talking to several types, or excuse me, talking to a set of different types of scientists as we were coming up with these, and then also kind of comparing it to our data to see if it seemed to be comparable for our region. Some of these thresholds were actually already pre-developed as well, and are generally accepted both by science and organizations like the EPA. So again, what we do is we take an observation, we compare it to a threshold. If it passes, they get 100%. If it fails, we give it a 0. And then just like you would do in tests or assignments in school, we add up all those passes and those failures, and then we get a final score. So before I go into the scores now, I'm kind of giving you guys the basics about the program. What I will say is that last year, and I'm sure that I'm probably sounding like a broken record, but COVID-19 made it a very, very interesting year for us. So unfortunately, COVID made our season abbreviated. We were unable to, well, we had some issues with our April sampling event, and we weren't able to get the volunteers out. We did collect some samples, but we had some issues with some of our lab analysis, and the data did not meet our needs, so we had to throw that entire month out. We also, if you guys recall, back around November, when a lot of the COVID cases were starting to ramp up again, we ended up having to cut off that sampling month too. So we had basically 2 seasons, 2 months in the seasons where generally we do start to see a little bit more storms and sometimes have a little bit more interesting data. Unfortunately, we weren't able to include those as a report card. On the flip side, our program got to be part of an initiative called Smart Citizen Science. And we're partnering right now with Cleveland Water Alliance and several other volunteer stream monitoring organizations in both Michigan, Ohio, and New York. And what we were trying to do is, first, we're trying to collaborate and try to get everybody on the same page so that we can start to have a unified message when it comes to volunteer water quality, or volunteer stream monitoring collection. But the other thing that we did was we tested out a brand new device. It was called an Erie Open System device. And what our hopes was that this is a low cost device that would allow more monitoring programs to start up. Unfortunately, after we tested the device, it didn't really meet the needs of the group. And so we're hoping that we'll be getting some new devices to try soon. So you can kind of see, obviously, COVID, working from home, that's my kitchen, that's my little setup lab. So as I was using this, that little bottom photo there is a look at some of the standards that shows you that the device was working, but unfortunately, it just didn't give us the accuracy and precision we were looking for. All right, so back to the report cards. How did we score? Well, not a whole lot different from previous years. And I will say that as I was developing this presentation, something got past me, and unfortunately, the Old Woman Creek report card is actually a C+, not a C-. So you can see that the report cards are kind of stacked, from west side of the county to the east side of the county, and also the grades seem to get better as you get over into the Old Woman Creek watershed. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about those grades as well too. I think, one of the things that I was hopeful on, although I didn't really think this would happen, but, during COVID-19, you were hearing all of these reports about how water was cleaning up everywhere. In Venice, the canals were clear. And I think a lot of that was response to the type of activities that were really impacting their water quality. In our area, the types of things that are impacting our water quality really didn't change in COVID. Agriculture went on as agriculture always does. We were staying at home and we were flushing our toilets just as much, if not even more than we were in other times. So even though we did have some disruption with COVID-19, I think as far as the types of stewardship or maybe the lack of stewardship in some of these watersheds really didn't make or break these scores or change them very much just because of COVID. So let's look a little bit closer at the scores. And unfortunately, this GoToMeeting is completely blocking me viewing anything on Old Woman Creek. But what I want to talk about a little bit is how these watersheds are slightly different. So Mills Creek is a very, very agricultural watershed that also has a wastewater treatment plant at one end of it in the headwaters. Pipe Creek is kind of a 50-50 agriculture and urban developed watershed. And then Old Woman Creek is unique in the fact that it's an agricultural watershed, but it has quite a lot of natural areas. It has both some natural corridors in it. It has, obviously, Old Woman Creek Reserve, a nice, large, almost 600-acre nature preserve at the mouth. And a lot of that makes a big difference, you know, in how these watersheds get their scores. So looking at Mills Creek, you know, you can see the scores were a hell of a lot, excuse me, were very, very worse, or were lower than some of the other scores. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that we have heavy agriculture and we've got that wastewater treatment plant that enters into that stream, and it's a very, very small watershed. Pipe Creek, you know, again, we have lots of issues with nitrogen and phosphorus, and we still do have some turbidity issues as well. And one of the things I want to point out is look at these macroinvertebrate scores. You know, in Mills Creek and Pipe Creek, where we've got way more open ditch networks, where we really don't have shading, we really don't have that good stream development, where we've got riffles, where we've got good substrates, we really see those macroinvertebrate scores suffer. And a lot of that shows us that this isn't just these pulsing storms, but that we're actually having sediment and nutrients that are impacting those scores, or excuse me, impacting those macroinvertebrate communities on a more chronic basis. When you get to Oldman Creek, phosphorus obviously is still something that's quite an issue in that watershed. Nitrogen turbidity also tends to be you know, an issue, but it's starting to get a little bit better. But luckily, the macroinvertebrate scores are much better. And so that's showing us that, you know, Old Woman Creek's pollution tends to be a little bit more geared to those storms when we're trying to figure out how to solve some of those problems. Okay, I've lost my ability to switch. There we go. So again, just kind of looking at the Oldman Creek watershed and how it differs a little bit from the others. 66% is agriculture, only 11% is urban, much, much different from Pipe Creek that has a much higher urban component to it. And then the other big thing, you've got Edison Woods, you've got the gorge all around the Berlinville and Berlin Heights, you've got Huffman Forest Preserve, you've got Old Woman Creek Reserve, you've got all these natural areas where there's really a lot of intact corridor that really makes a difference for this system to respond to some of the pollutants that come its way. So I always like to talk a little bit about precipitation. And precipitation last year, you can kind of see, you know, aside from May and October, we were a little bit more below what our average rainfall was throughout the year. Our precipitation is collected by another volunteer program called COCORAS, and that's actually run by the National Weather Service through NOAA. And what we're able to do is we're actually able to take several different locations throughout just that watershed, and we can really zone in on what type of rainfall hits. We switched over to COCORAS because what we've actually found is that, you know, climate change is showing that some of our storms are becoming smaller and more intense, and we can actually see storms only hit one watershed. So if you look at that little chart there where it says the number of storms, in Oldman Creek there in the blue, we had 18 storms that we recorded. Now these are storms where we've had more than 3/4 of an inch of rain in a 48-hour period. Now in Pipe Creek and in Mills Creek, we only had 11 storms that we recorded during this whole period. So it really kind of shows you, you know, Erie County is the second smallest county in Ohio. And yet, even though we're small, we can still have these really, really intense and small storms that really affect watersheds a little bit different. All right, so the first thing I'm going to go into now, kind of really diving deep into these report card grades, is I want to talk about the vital signs, right? The vital signs are this very first look, you know, when you go to the doctor, again, you're getting your temperature, your pulse, your blood pressure all taken. So with vital signs, we never want failures, because when we have failures, that shows us that, hey, there's something acutely damaging that's going on in this watershed. What we're starting to see in Old Woman Creek is this year after year failure for the parameter that in the vital sign called dissolved oxygen. I'm going to talk a little bit about why dissolved oxygen is so important, but I want you guys to look at that map of Old Woman Creek and notice that those failures are occurring both in the estuary, right up near Lake Erie, and they're also occurring in the headwaters. Now, what's different about those is that the water movement is a little bit different in those two areas. What we're finding is that the headwaters are starting to run very, very dry. We maybe don't have a lot of that cover. And in the estuary, we're also seeing that, you know, when the mouth closes on that barrier beach, the water there, it's still very shallow. It's very slow moving. Sometimes it's even not very moving at all. And that system starts to really heat up, and it's very productive as well. So we don't want to see these failures. You know, we want the system to be to always have a high enough dissolved oxygen. We haven't experienced any major fish kills that have been reported, but again, this is not something that we want to see in a healthy system. Just to kind of look a little bit more about dissolved oxygen and how we measure it. We measure it on a scale. This really only shows 1 to 10, but we go up to about 14 milligrams per liter. Pretty much anything over 6 is going to be enough oxygen to really support aquatic life. Once you start to dip down below 6, and especially once you get under 4, we really start to see that system become way too low for fish to even be able to survive. So the first thing that we start to notice is that some of our more sensitive fish will start to drop out of the system. And unfortunately, sometimes when the system fully bottoms out, you can result in a bunch of dead fish in that particular area. We have had reported fish kills that we've gone out and we've investigated around the watershed. Most of them have been more because of natural causes. And those causes are mainly because, again, we've got low water levels. Now, I say natural causes, however, low water levels in the stream is something that's not very natural. If you think about how we farm, if you think about how we build our communities, one of the things that we're really good about doing is getting the water off the land as quickly as possible, right? So we've got tile in our agricultural fields. We have curb and gutter. We've got storm sewer systems that really get this water out as quickly as possible. The result of that, though, is that we're actually starting to alter the hydrology of that system. You know, it's very flashy and fast, you know, when it rains. And unfortunately, all that water that would have soaked into the ground and taken a long time to make it to the stream causes what we call the base flow of a stream to start to drop. We've had several reports from people over the years that said that when they were a kid, they used to swim in different areas of Old Woman Creek because it was deep enough. Now it's not even more than ankle deep in the middle of summer. So it really just kind of shows you, as we've managed our water on this big landscape level, we're getting rid of all of our water in the spring, and when we need it the most in the summer, it's already gone and it's already out into Lake Erie. Another thing that's happening is a lack of shading. We're seeing lots and lots of tree-lined ditches being removed of their vegetation. And without that vegetation there's no shading at all. So if you combine very shallow water and no shading, what's happening is the water starting to heat up much more drastically in the summer. As you guys see on that graph right there, as the temperature increases, your dissolved water, or excuse me, your dissolved oxygen in the water will actually drop because it'll start to gas out of the system. So we've got this big combination of actions that we've done that have resulted in low water levels, and then this also another action of removing the trees that is now increasing the temperature in these low water environments. All of that is contributing to these low dissolved oxygen issues, especially up in the headwater areas. But you might think to yourself, like, well, I've paddled through Old Woman Creek and it seems like there's a lot of water there. It seems like it's pretty deep in some of these areas. So why does Old Woman Creek have an issue? And in Old Woman Creek, or excuse me, in the estuary itself, it's a very productive system. There's lots and lots of plant growth. There's lots of algal growth there. And I'm not talking about, you know, the algal issues in the microcystin out on Lake Erie, but I'm talking about a lot of aquatic life, you know, a lot of rooted algae and a lot of plants and things like that are great at producing a lot of oxygen when the sun's out. But as soon as that sun goes away, all that life is continuing to respirate. And so what we'll actually find is that you can have giant swings of dissolved oxygen. And so maybe at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a full sunny day, you know, you might be getting 14 milligrams per liter, but you go out and sample something at, you know, 5 in the morning, and you can see that those levels can drop pretty significantly. So Not to say anything bad about, Old Woman Creek Reserve, and you guys are going to see how important having that intact wetland is to this entire watershed. I'm just trying to give you guys an idea that even when you have a productive system, when you're not circulating the water through that system and you start to slow those waters down, you still can run into these low dissolved oxygen types of issues. So how do we solve this issue? I think that this vital sign has been has resulted in a failure for several years in a row now that really starts to tell us that, hey, this isn't just a one-time occurrence. This is something that's chronic in this watershed that needs to be addressed. I think foremost is that we need to start to reshade the stream everywhere that we can. We also have to try to get out the news that if your ditch is tree lined, it's doing far better good at helping this entire system than if you were to pull all those trees out. So anywhere, even on some of these ditches, that we can do what's down in that photo there, where we can actually have a tree lined corridor, that's what we really want to see in this watershed. The other thing is we really need to look hard at whether or not this system really should be a flashy system. I think we need to try to work towards restoring natural flow patterns. It says low patterns. It should say flow patterns on there. And I think the best way that we can do this is we've got to find ways to improve water going in through the soil. And I'm going to get into a little bit of soil health a little bit later. But right now, our runoff is coming off too fast from these farm fields, even though they're not pavement. And it's really affecting how these base flows are. And then obviously we need to try to reduce some of the nutrients. Old Woman Creek Reserve and all the different type of biological life and all that plant growth that you're having there, it's good. It's helping to process those nutrients out, but that in itself too is being overwhelmed as well. So once you have these additional nutrients, you start to have these blooms of different types of species that then can impact what type of oxygen levels that you have in the system. All right, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and start talking more a little bit about the actual grade indicators that we have. So we're going to start with sediment. Old Woman Creek is still does have some sediment issues there, and we still have some sites that continually to be some of our bad actor sites. Lyles Road and Tennant, which are kind of those headwater area sites. You can kind of see they're on that southern portion of the watershed. And we also have Chapin Road, which is a little bit more closer to the middle of the watershed. Interestingly enough, if you guys look at that map, you'll see right in the center of the watershed, we've got a couple sites that actually receive really good scores. Those scores are usually typically good because those are also the sites that are right along the Bre Escarpment. So we have a pretty significant grade change in the watershed. That 1 mile section of stream that runs through Berlin Heights drops in 100 feet in about a mile. So we're talking about a system where the water doesn't last for very long. And so generally we don't have that sediment build through that area and kind of stay suspended in that area for very long, like we do in those other sections where the grade is much smaller. And again, also in those upper watersheds, you can also see, that Tennant Road and those Lyles Road, and even some of those yellow markings that you guys, or excuse me, those orange markings that you guys see on there. Those also happen to be in those areas where we have more highly erodible soils. So anytime that those soils are left bare throughout the winter, whether we don't have crop residue left on them, if the bank has been removed of all of its vegetation, or if we don't even have a living cover crop on those are the types of soils that are going to be more susceptible to every time we have a rain, towards every time we have a heavy winds, those types of soil particles can move and make their way to the stream. So I kind of jumped the gun a little bit. Here's a couple photos of what we've seen. We've got areas in the watershed that when you have a downpour rain and you have a bare soil, you start to get rill erosion, you start to get gully erosion, where you get concentrated water that just dislodges that soil particle from the rest of its soil profile and moves it downstream. We also see that once you remove vegetation off of a bank, there's nothing there. So as that water comes up and it's flowing very quickly through the ditch, it also starts to cut at the toe of that bank, and we start to see massive areas of failure on those banks. Other agricultural activities, we do have some livestock in the stream in the watershed. What I will say is that a lot of the livestock farms right now are starting to work towards fencing their cattle out, and so that's been a great thing to see, and we're starting to see the streams themselves repair themselves just as soon as you get that livestock off the banks. And I'll also say that we're also starting to reduce a little bit of tillage, and we're starting to see more and more cover crops planted every year as well. So again, jumped the gun on my slide, but what are some of the changes that we need? Anytime that we have a stream buffer, that's a good thing to see. Old Woman Creek does have quite a few woody corridors, which is fantastic. But as you start to drive up into the headwaters of the stream, you'll start to see that the buffers change from woods to grass alone, or potentially no grass at all. And we've got several areas where we've got row crop farm field that's all the way up along the side of the ditch. And those are the types of things that we want to try to see. We want to try to see those farm fields just buffered out just a little bit more. We also don't want to see tillage. If we've got areas that are left completely bare all winter long, and if they've even been worked up, those are the types of fields that are going to be more susceptible to losing their topsoil into Old Woman Creek. When they lose that soil, it's also carrying with it a lot of nutrients. And that's what we're starting to see in the spring times when we see our first flush of nutrients come through. I won't go through all these individually because I want to try to get through on time. After sediment, let's start talking about some of the nutrients. This year was kind of an interesting year, and some of this may be, before we get too excited, remember that we didn't sample in April and in November, where sometimes we see a pulse of nitrogen. So the scores got much better in most of the watershed. You can see that by a lot of the green sites there. But we did still kind of have some struggling sites. And I think a lot of that had to do with, being associated with different types of livestock areas. We did have some areas where we know that we have some septic system issues that we're dealing with. And I think that that's what reflects in those scores. I think one of the good things is that I'd like to see this trend continue with nitrogen, because Old Woman Creek has had a bit of a nitrogen and phosphorus problem over the years. But I'm not going to get too excited about this one because it's a little bit at odds than what we've seen in our previous years. So definitely something to watch in the future. Phosphorus, on the other hand, in Old Woman Creek was pretty much not very good throughout the entire system. Again, the difference between nitrogen and phosphorus is that with nitrogen, we tend to see it pulse through the system all at once. With phosphorus, when you have high levels of phosphorus in a farm field, say your soil levels are high, every single time it rains, you're gonna see that phosphorus moving through the system. This past year, again, Old Woman Creek had very many more storms this year than some of the other watersheds. So I think that's what we saw, is just a lot of this nutrient just moving through the system each time that we went out and sampled. So where are our sources? Again, we go back to, what type of landscape do we have in the watershed? Agriculture is obviously a big one. We've had problems in the past with manure stockpiles. I don't really think that that's one of our problems this past year. Fertilizer application, I think we had a little bit less corn out in the watershed this year. And I think that without corn being out there, you don't apply any type of nitrogen fertilizer. So I think that probably added to a little bit of the nitrogen scores. And again, we're starting to see this transition now with livestock, where we're starting to see more pasture rotation on some of our farms. We're also starting to see some of our farms work on projects where they're starting to fence the cattle out. And I think we might now start seeing some of the impacts of that. Failing septic systems continues to still be a big issue in the watershed. There are no sewer systems, sewage sewer systems in the watershed. We have high concentrated area around Berlin Heights, where you've got systems that wouldn't meet today's standards in how they were designed. You also have some systems that are getting more than 25 years old, and so it's probably time for some of those to be replaced. And unfortunately, we've got various levels of management of those systems. You know, we've got some people who literally won't go out and manage a system, maybe because they just don't know better, until it starts to kind of bubble up in their backyard and starts to become foul smelling. That is not the time. You should be managing your septic system, getting it inspected, getting it pumped at least every 5 years, more so recommended every 3 years. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about soil degradation, because this is something that I've been looking into a lot more in response to what we can do, why our water quality is not really improving, and what we really need to start working our farmers with in the future. So again, septic systems, I've kind of covered some of this. A lot of our systems are outdated. Some of our systems are just straight up failing. And again, the maintenance still tends to be a little bit more of a mystery to some of the people. I know I live in a city where I've always lived on a community sewer system, and I wouldn't even know the first thing to do if I moved out into the country. And as we start to see some of these people who have moved from being under a municipal sewer system, they move out into a country, or excuse me, out into the rural areas where they don't have that. Many of them just don't really realize what it takes now to own a home that has a septic system until a problem goes wrong. So, okay, so one of my favorite things to talk about now. I was never big on soil in the past, but now I'm really understanding why soil is so important to look at with the health of our watersheds. I've been spending a lot of time walking around farm fields, talking to local farmers, talking to soil health experts, and really kind of diving deep into how do we solve the issues of a flashy watershed where the flows are not right? How do we solve the issues of sediment and nutrient runoff when we can't just buy up all the land and plant trees? You know, how do we try to go back and assess how can farmers change operations that help them, you know, in their bottom line with producing, you know, grains and livestock and different things like that, but also trying to be very, very mindful that their land is also running off and causing some of the issues with Lake Erie. So I just kind of wanted to show this slide here that kind of shows the difference between a healthy soil and an unhealthy soil. And the more that I dig into soil conditions in our area, the more I realize that there's a lot of unhealthy soil out there. Now, it's not horrible. It's not going back to the Dust Bowl era. It's not going to some of the issues that we're starting to see out in like China and Australia and things like that. But what we are finding is that we've got a lot of compaction issues. We've got a lot of soil stability issues where our soil degradation is low, or excuse me, where our soil aggregation is low. And we're also having a lot of soil carbon issues as well. So that's the soil organic matter. Most of our soils should be in a range of somewhere like around 4 to 6% organic matter. And most of our soils right now are hovering around about 1.5 to 2%. So without that, with all those things involved, an unhealthy soil does not allow water to penetrate. We've got farm fields that crust so bad in the summer that they run off just like a parking lot would run off. You know, that's not good for the crop. That's also not good for the watershed itself. There's been studies in the past that have shown that phosphorus can stratify in the soil, and I think it doesn't necessarily say the full picture. It's not a reason to go out and start tilling up soil, but I think it shows that there are several principles that you need to follow to maintain a healthy soil and to improve a soil, and no-till is only one aspect of that. So one of the things that I'm working on is really working with farmers now to try to integrate 4 soil health principles on their fields. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to rebuild that soil so that it can hold on to nutrients much better, so it can soak up some of that water and release it a little bit slower so that our base flows will return to normal. And that We can also help to prevent some surface erosion in our winter months, or even in the summer months when we start to have some of those really intense rainstorms. And so how we need to do that is we do need to be promoting no-till. However, we can't just promote no-till alone. We have to emphasize the fact that the only way to heal a damaged soil is to have living roots in it. And if you only have those living roots in it during the course of that cash crop, you know, you're only thinking about having a cash crop from May to maybe September. But what about the other months? You know, if you don't have something living there, you're really not able to maintain the soil profile as a living system the way that it absolutely needs to be. So keeping the soil covered, obviously, you know, crop residues are great. Whenever you see that corn stubble all winter long, wheat stubble all winter long, that's great. Problem is, if we don't have something green out there all winter too, again, we don't have those living roots that are really going to help turn the health of that soil around. And then increasing diversity. One of the sad things I think that a lot of people don't really realize with farming is that there's a lot of farms out there that rent more than they actually own. And as we're starting to get more rental ground, the landowner sometimes is not actually a farmer at all. And so they don't really understand what farming is all about. They really don't understand what conservation is all about. And we're starting to find that certain landowners maybe don't want a diverse set of crops on that land. They want it to stay in beans every year because they just don't like the height of corn, or they don't like cover crops at all because they just think they look unsightly. And so we're having some issues with trying to make sure that farms are rotating their crops and that they're trying to increase diversity, whether they're doing it with a corn, bean, wheat rotation, or whether they're doing it with increasing diversity on cover crops. So all things that I'm trying to work on, because I think that if we start to have a healthier soil, ultimately we're going to have a much healthier functioning watershed as well. So out of the farm field and talking a little bit, I talked a little bit about the value of wetlands. And I think that Old Woman Creek and the fact that you have this natural estuary at the mouth really is just the absolute poster child for why wetlands are so important, and why, if you guys have been paying attention to the news and you've been hearing about these H2 Ohio projects and why they're really trying to increase a lot of the coastal wetlands, and they're trying to reconnect a lot of the coastal wetlands. I think if you look at the data from our report cards, it really shows you why that is so important. So Berlin Road is really kind of our upper stream site before it starts to enter the estuary system itself. And you can kind of see that the total score for that watershed is a D. But as it makes its way through the estuary and before it enters into Lake Erie, you'll see that now all of a sudden our water quality went from that D all the way up to an A. If you look a little bit closer there, you can see how important the estuary is at treating phosphorus. You know, so when you think about the water or the Lake Erie algal blooms, one of the biggest pushes that they have right now is how do we get those phosphorus levels down? And I think that just to look at the water quality data in Old Woman Creek, I think it just shows that how valuable these coastal wetland systems actually are, and how we should be supporting anything that helps to increase these systems. Now, nitrogen's a little bit more difficult, right? Wetlands are absolutely wonderful at dealing with nitrogen. I think in this case with Old Woman Creek is we just haven't seen nitrogen, at least, again, this is just this year's data. We haven't seen the nitrogen. It still does clean up, but not quite as drastically as we've seen with phosphorus. So that being said, I just kind of want to go over, you know, it's not a big gloom and doom. We've got a lot of different types of things going on in the watershed. Are we where we need to be? Absolutely not. Are we seeing some changes? Yes, we are. And I think that should motivate us to continue. So just in this past year, we've worked on some projects where we've actually increased the amount of cover crops in the watershed by about 1,700 acres. And those, we've been working directly with some of the farmers that have made those changes. And I'm very happy to say that these are some of the farmers that didn't just do this because it was a grant project, but now they're trying to make sure that their fields are covered with a living cover crop year after year. And so that is a wonderful, wonderful change to see, and hopefully their neighbors will take note and they'll start doing this as well. We've also had 500 acres that have now converted over from being tilled year after year to now being full no-till fields. So that's another wonderful thing. I know it sounds like kind of a drop in the bucket, but these are these small changes that are going to add up to quite a lot. We also did over 250 acres of grid soil sampling. Grid soil sampling allows a farmer to get a very, very detailed look at their field so that when they do apply nutrients, they're applying exactly what that crop needs and nothing more. And so that nutrient management really helps to prevent some of the nutrient loss. Coming soon, we've got another farm that's working on a manure storage facility, and they're going to be hopefully adding some additional pasture management in there. Again, we don't have a whole lot of livestock in the watershed, but we're slowly starting to see some of these farms start to change what they're doing. And a lot of them are doing it because they're also paying attention to these report cards as well. And they are basically responding to the call. And then another exciting H2 Ohio project that's actually happening is remember how I said shading the stream is so important. We do have a 2-acre riparian tree planting that's going to be going in right on Old Woman Creek as well too, and that's part of this new H2 Ohio and Lake Erie CREP, which stands for the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program that's going in. So again, it's, you know, these are small little projects, but again, it's good to see that there's some changes happening out there, and it's good to see this momentum starting, and hopefully we'll continue to keep building, and we'll see this watershed improve greatly. So I see that there are questions. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna go over just one last thing. I want to try to just summarize some things, you know, and try to put them in something that you guys can remember when you guys are talking about not only Old Woman Creek, but a lot of these are can be applied to most of the watersheds in Lake Erie and the Western Basin specifically. But first and foremost, we really need to heal the soil as best we can. We need to make sure that no-till is becoming a regular occurrence across our watersheds. We really need to make sure that soil tests are being done and grid sampling over just a simple soil tests are being done. That way, when you do that, you're doing a better nutrient management plan. We need to have living cover crops. We should be driving around fields in the winter and everything should be green, or most of it should be green year after year. Again, I won't kind of go over this, but we really need to start shading out our streams, and we need to quit removing trees from the bank. They're really doing so much more good for us than they are once we take them off. And we need to fix the flush. You know, this is a really, really big issue for the Berlin Heights community. It's a very expensive issue, but first and foremost, we need to start maintaining our septic systems. If we have one, we need to get them inspected. We need to get them pumped out. If we find out that they're in disrepair, we need to try to get them replaced, or we need to get them upgraded. There are grants. If anyone out there knows of someone that needs one, have them contact me, have them contact the health department. There is grants to help people with that. But I think ultimately, especially in the village of Berlin Heights, they're really going to have to look at a community sewage system solution for them to address those issues. And it's going to take a lot of support from everyone. It's probably also going to take some financial support for that type of community. So I'm just going to say that this program does not happen alone. Our volunteers, especially this past year, still had the dedication to go out during COVID. It was difficult. It was difficult making sure everyone was trained. It was difficult making sure people got kits. But I just want to say that the volunteers year after year deliver. These are great citizen scientists that we get to work with, and the program would not be possible at all without them. We also, you know, get a lot of support and funds from Old Woman Creek Reserve. They're the ones who actually analyze all of the samples that come back in, and you know additional staff even at my district really helps me, get kits out. They help me with managing some of the equipment. Friends of Woolman Creek, Friends of Pipe Creek, they've helped with volunteers, they've helped with supporting funds. And again, Cleveland Water Alliance is one of our newer partners. They've been very, very generous in trying to help solve some of the issues that we've had, both financially and with getting the word out. And just the fact that they're starting this collaboration so that most of our volunteer monitoring programs can kind of come together on a singular platform for the Great Lakes, I think is just phenomenal. So with that, I'll just say you guys can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You guys can go check out the watershed report cards. They are uploaded right now on our website, erieconserves.org. You can also explore previous report cards as well. And with that, there's just a beautiful photo I got to shoot out paddling, or no, I think I'm standing on the deck out at Woolman Creek last year. So. Sorry, it's a lot of information, people, so thanks.
Bre, thank you. You always bring us a lot of information. I always learn so much whenever I listen to you. We do have some questions in the chat. And then if you want to stop sharing, we can make our pictures bigger. And if people want, they can turn on their cameras again. The first question, Bre, was from Ken. And maybe it's a little longer, and so I'm gonna let you read it, just so you can get all of the pieces and parts of that.
Okay, so his question is related to the proportion of agriculture in the watershed. Has it increased or decreased? Let's see. What I can say is that the watershed agriculture has remained almost the same. There has been some loss of agriculture to development. However, there's been woods that have been taken out of production that have kind of gone now into cropland. So the cropland is still close to the same, but there has been a shift. There's a little bit less woods and there's a little bit more urban, but not that significant. We're only talking about a couple percentages, that's all. Does that answer the question? Let me see if there's other questions here.
Thank you.
There was one from Sandy about kind of what's being done in Berlin Heights about septic. And I told her we started thinking about it, but you can probably expand on that.
Yeah. And you know what, I'm just gonna say one more thing about Ken's question too. So the survey methods that we use for that are CCAP data. And so it's still the same method from previously to now that does them. So if you actually want to see some of those, the problem is I think it ends in 2016, I think is as far as they go. But NOAA has a really, really great website called Digital Coast. And if you go into Digital Coast, there's an interactive map where you can actually toggle between years and you can actually see the differences of what's actually changed in these watersheds.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, so what's going on in Berlin Heights? So several years ago, the health department actually started going down the road with Berlin Heights to kind of look at exactly what the extent of the septic system issue was. That's where they found that some people really weren't aware they had a septic system. They weren't sure really what the management was. And so there was a little bit of education that was done back then. Unfortunately, the current EPA report on how to solve the issue is putting in a giant pipe and running it all the way to either the Minnewanka plant or the Huron treatment plant. This, unfortunately, is so expensive. The community is so small and does not have the income of that community, cannot get this project done. So it was cost prohibitive, and so at that point it was kind of put on the back burner. If you fast forward a little bit, we've had the issues with the Great Recession, and I think that a combo of that has just made that whole situation not really come to light in that community. I think what we're hoping to do in this next couple of years is, we've contacted, both the reserve, the conservation district. We've reached out to the health department. We said, okay, we really need to start bringing this back up in the community as a discussion point. I think what we're going to do is we're going to combine it with some education, just about the issue itself, and a little bit more about just general maintenance, because that's also one of our issues. But the reality is, if any of you guys have been through Berlin Heights, the home lots are very, very small. So if you're a resident that finds out they have a failing system, unfortunately, there's nothing you can do, because in order to get yourself into compliance, you have to put in one of the new systems. And unfortunately, your lot size is not large enough to get that system. So it's kind of like this weird stalemate where they really can't do anything. The community just really needs to start looking at a much larger solution to the problem. But it's very, very costly. So I hope that answers it.
And then if anyone else has a question and they want to ask it, they can come on camera and just flash us a smile, and we'll be happy to answer it. Sandy also made the suggestion that the Friends might be able to help finance some tree plantings along streams and ditches to increase that shade for the stream. So.
Well, again, Jen, I thank you for allowing me. I'm always glad that I get to do the first brown bag lunch, and I want to thank everyone for being here. There's a couple of volunteer stream monitors that are on this this webinar right now. So again, I just want to say thank you to them too. I mean, they really, really make it easy, when they go out and they collect the data. I will also say that there is another set of watershed report cards now in Lake Erie. So if you guys haven't checked them out, there are Western Basin report cards, and I think that they are excellent, and you should kind of check them out and kind of compare how some of these other watersheds compare to ours. And next year, we are actually going to be doing a trends analysis of our watershed too, to kind of give you more of a long range look of what we've been seeing, which is going to be a little bit different than what we did today, where I'm just really reporting on what last year's data was. So that should be really interesting. So I hope to see you guys all next year.
Great. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. I just want to do a quick shout out to some of our upcoming brown bags in May. We're going to highlight the Holiday Harbor project that Oldham Creek, I think Erie Soil and Water and Sea Grant worked on, a green infrastructure project that was put in Huron. And then in June, our brown bag will be focused on the Indigenous history of Oldham Creek. So we're going to have some experts who've done some of the research in this area, and then some other experts in Ohio's Indigenous history speaking. So tune in for that. That one's always a topic of interest for folks. And then in August, we're going to have our hauling scholar who'll be working with Emily and the species monitoring program to highlight what species we're seeing and what they're doing in the reserve. As always, thanks to the Friends of Oldham Creek for helping support in many different ways, especially during COVID this year. It's always nice to see their faces and know that they're there to support us. So if no one else has any questions, I thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you hopefully next month. Bye, everyone.
Oh, hey, I will say we are looking for volunteers if anyone's interested.
All right, have a good.
Hopefully I got them before they left.
Yeah, if you want to volunteer and you're not already, email myself or Bre. All right, enjoy your Friday, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, Jen,
Yeah.
will you be sending out emails to register for the upcoming ones?
Yep,
Okay.
I usually send them out when we're a little closer.
Yeah, I just want to make sure you will, so I don't have to do it now. That's fine. I will look forward to it.
All right, thanks, Tim.
Okay.
All right, bye. Sandy, did you have another question?
Yeah, do you use the constant contact list for the emails?
Yeah.
All right, do you and I need to get together, or should I send you a list of our members who are current members to make sure they're all on your list? How do you want to handle that?
Yeah, just send me a list. I think Rosie sent me one last year at least, so it should be relatively updated. But if you want to send me another one, I can double check it.
Okay, I think
I always send it out to the members.
we removed about, I don't know, 30 members who hadn't paid in a couple years. So there's
Okay.
an updated list I'll send to you then. Thank you.
Okay,
Good meeting.
perfect.
All right.
Yep. All right, y'all.